Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is Friday, the third day of Black History Month. You're watching American Journal. I'm your host, Harrison Smith. And as funny as I think it is to keep mentioning that it's Black History Month with ever actually talking about Black history, I decided we'd change things up a little bit. Instead, I actually put together a collection of clips. Unfortunately, I had to go all the way back to the late 80s and early 90s to find this, but I thought it was pretty illuminating. Here's just a little montage of black people reminiscing about the black community before the government got involved. Let's watch.
Tell me about growing up in Louisiana before you moved to Los Angeles.
I have the greatest memories of it. A family, so much love. I knew nothing about segregation, knew nothing about prejudice or any kind of racial dilemmas or whatever. It was just a time of love and family, eating together. You just could be whatever you wanted to be. And I remember early on my parents stressing education, the need for education being the key. It was just great. I remember the Sundays, we sat down, we ate together, we walked, to church every Sunday. It was a great, great time.
I grew up in South Philadelphia. We didn't realize it was segregated. All we knew is that our neighborhood was all black, and we weren't even that conscious of color because the people who owned the store down the street were black, the tailor, the restaurant owners, the undertaker, everybody in the neighborhood, and it was a very small street, everybody worked, blue collar, essentially. Very close-knit neighborhood. Everyone had over 4 children. We played in the streets together. And the level of interest in education was just profound. I mean, even to this day, I don't think I've ever had such a positive educational experience than I did in my first 6 years, because school was an integral part of the community. We had a black superintendent, a black principal, all the teachers were black. Many of them didn't live in the neighborhood either. Contrary to popular belief, they were middle-income people who lived elsewhere. But their hearts and their souls were into those kids. I remember that 3rd grade and 4th grade plays were always conducted in the evenings so that parents could attend. And an auditorium that seated maybe 400, 500 people with standing room only for 3rd and 4th grade play. Up until 1959, 78% of all black families had a man and a woman in them. That's a fact. Teen pregnancy was looked down upon. Sexual activity among kids, everyone bragged about it, no one did it. But if someone became pregnant, if there was an aunt in the South, they would go there, so that the moral standards and ethical standards for people living in those communities was extremely high. It had little to do with your income. Many of us were poor without realizing that we were poor. During the war years, I thought everyone had one pair of shoes. Today, I have a lot of shoes because of those early experiences. Oh, yeah. I mean, the discipline was in the community. I mean, you didn't speak back to an adult. The thought of an elderly person being disrespected was just unheard of. And teachers were never disrespected.
In the black community, we were prepared by setting certain goals, objectives for ourselves. This was done primarily in the home, in the church, and in the school at that particular time, because schools had a heavy reinforcement into our characters because they were black schools. Schools were not integrated at that time. Do the best that you can with your life. You are unique. You have a contribution to make. You have something to offer. You have a talent. You have skills, many, many other things that you do have. Go on out there into the world and get them.
And so it imposed a kind of discipline. And again, it was a discipline that had little to do with how much money you made. There was a sense of comfort, a sense of well-being, a sense of oneness between the school and the community.
It sounds like actually a wonderful time, absolutely. Really
Absolutely. It really was. And the issue of white people was never issue. It was never discussed. The most exciting thing in our community is when Joe Louis was fighting on Friday night on the radio.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the American Journal. I am your host, Harrison Smith. What a show we have for you today. I have so many videos that I just absolutely have to play for you. Everything from Zelensky calling for preemptive nuclear strikes on Russia to Democrats bouncing around like meth heads in the in Congress. Just wild stuff across the board. We'll take your phone calls as well. I'll be joined by Dan Miller of the Texas Nationalist Movement a little bit later in the show as well. We'll do our daily dispatch in just a second, but just since I didn't have time to comment on it right there, I did want to just finish up my thoughts about the video that you just watched. Again, the first video, I'm sure you recognize him, Johnny Cochran. I was during an interview in, must have been 1992, 1994, something like that, around the time of the OJ trial, where he was describing life in Louisiana. The other guy is from it was unused footage from a PBS documentary talking about growing up in South Philadelphia. South Philadelphia, you think people growing up there would describe it the same today? The family, the community, the focus on school, the respect for elder. Do you think any of that exists still? No, it's all gone away. It's interesting, isn't it? Because as they described this, everything they described was inborn, wasn't it? It was all self-enforced. It wasn't something imposed upon the black community. It was the black community themselves actually upholding themselves and keeping each other to account and running their own businesses. And it's almost sad because you almost have to go back to the early 1990s to find people who were alive who could tell you about that, about what it was like growing up in the 50s and 60s. And you can hear it. They describe it much the same way you would hear any white person describe their childhood in the 1950s and 60s. Again, because it was inborn. And this was all just before the government came in to help. You're doing pretty well, but we think you could use our assistance to do a little better. Flash forward 40 years, and the black community has been more or less utterly destroyed. There's a picture that's been going around that sort of illustrates it pretty well, actually. A typical black family in 1960. And when I say the term typical, I'm not using it lightly. I'm using it literally, right? The average, the most common example would be a family with a mother and a father, both in the house, married together with their kids. Dad usually had a job. Mom would be at home looking after the kids. Cut to 2019. And it's not just the average. Like, it's almost an inverse, right? 78% of black children in the 50s and 60s had both parents in the home. Now about 78% of the kids don't. Which, even that, I mean, over half the black kids in places like New York City don't even get to be born. They get aborted before they ever exist. So what really happened? Is this, have we gotten more racist since then? Was it racism that caused this, or was it the inverse? Was it enforced dependency on the government? And we talked about it a million times. The fact that black Americans could go from literally below zero, slavery, not allowed to read, not allowed to have families, sell your wife away to make a quick buck, in 100 years, less than 100 years, to almost parity, especially in terms of things that matter, like, family cohesion and number of kids, that sort of stuff, almost parity with their white counterparts. And then the government comes in to assist, and it destroys the whole thing. So again, I think it's worth mentioning. Also, of course, one of the side effects of the fact that you don't have strong family structures widely in the black community. And again, I really shouldn't have to qualify anything I say here, because you should be intelligent enough to understand what I mean when I say that. When I'm using an example like this, I'm sure there's black people out there like, but my family is coherent. Yes, I know, but 78% of them aren't, and that's a problem. So let's focus on the wider statistical reality rather than the personal anecdotes. And one of the side effects of not having intergenerational cohesion in the black community is that, well, if your dad's not around, I doubt his dad's not around. I doubt his dad's around, right? So, who's going to be there to tell kids what it was like if there's no old people around? If there's no grandparents there to tell you the stories of what it was like when they were growing up, then maybe you believe the mainstream media that it was just a hellish, just constant oppression, constant hatred. You couldn't do anything right. That's not how the people that were alive then explained it. But, if all you're going on is the media and you don't actually have any extended family to relate to, then it's easier to convince you that life was different than what it really was. So I'd like to get back to that somehow. But unfortunately, our government and the liberals that support it always double down, constantly, forever. And it doesn't matter if it's if they're proven wrong in a month or a year or 50 years down the line, their strategies still aren't working, they stick with them and they continue to press for the exact same things over and over and over, regardless of the fact that the people it's supposed to help are ultimately destroyed by it. It doesn't matter to them. What matters to them is that their wrong ideas be continually pushed, regardless of the effects that they have. So pretty horrific stuff, actually, what's been done to the black community over the last 50 years. And of course, it corresponds in a one-to-one manner to the increase of government intervention in the lives of these people. So I thought that was interesting. I always think it's fascinating going back to the early 1990s and watching whether it's famous or unknown people talk about their childhoods and just how incredibly different it is than the wider portrayal and the portrayal that most people believe. There's a video that I think I showed here, Robot Polisher edited. It was a rant I was going on where I was talking about, if you could go back in time and pull somebody from the past, from the 1910s or 20s or 50s or 40s and brought them here, they wouldn't be able to handle it. It would be so bad to them. Like they would reject it outright. They would demand to go back to the time before. Oh, but what about medical advancements? Yeah, that's nice, but have you watched TV recently? Right? It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. So they'd want to go back. And when Robot Polisher published that video on Twitter, a black guy responded saying, well, not for black people. You know, it was way worse for black. It wasn't, though. It wasn't. I guarantee if you took a black person from the 1950s, even one that was subject to like brutal, oppression or segregation that they didn't like back then, if you brought them forward and showed them drag queen story time, they would be wrestling the time machine controls out of your hand. Get me the hell out of here. They would return to the 1950s and go, we got to get out of here. We got to do something. I got to change the trajectory. Because I went into the future just now, and you wouldn't believe the type of crap that I've seen. You wouldn't believe the type of stuff they're doing to humanity. There's no way that what's going on right now, would somehow be a positive development from the 1950s. It's horrifying. It's horrifying what they're doing now. And I think people from the past would recognize that no matter what race they are. And again, I don't want to get confused here. It's not like it was better when black people were oppressed and kept down. I think there's different inputs. There's different independent variables that go into this. The primary one is government intervention. And I think this was the poison pill of the civil rights movement. This is the government in that you can just picture them in like a sleazy trench coat, like the fox from Pinocchio or something, just going, oh yeah, oh you want equal rights, do you? Well, tell you what, we'd give you equal rights, but we want to give you even more. Why don't we also give you welfare? Why don't we also give you abortion? Why don't we also give you affirmative action? Isn't that better? Won't this be nice? And then, just like Pinocchio, everybody turns into jackasses. That's just how it goes. So it was a poison pill. It was a lie. There was absolutely no reason why civil rights and equal representation under the law is necessarily combined with government subsidies and subsidizing failures in your community, subsidizing misbehavior, covering up for, bad actors within your community that ultimately destroy it. There's no reason why those two things have to be intertwined. And if we could go back in time, can you imagine if we just had one and not the other? If we just had the equalization of rights and the fulfillment of the promises of the Constitution without the socialism, can you imagine where we'd be right now? It'd be a much better thing. That's your Black History lesson from Infowars.com, brought to you by InfoWarsStore.com. Go there now to support us as we fight for all of humanity against the forces that destroy us all, each in our own particular way. Well,
but I just want to say about Diet Force. Diet Force is amazing. I'm 45 and I have bits. I go to the gym and I have bits that won't move. And Diet Force has helped me move those bits. Like under my pecs, my belly, I'm just taking Diet Force 2 tablets a day. Man, if you're like struggling to get like chip shape for the ladies, mate, Diet Force is the go. you have to get the Diet Force and have 2 a day and just keep active. And it's amazing.
InfoWarsStore.com, X7 Diet Force.
InfoWarsStore.com, baby.
Now on sale. We're cutting that call into an ad. I can guarantee you that. Thank you so much for the call, Grant. God bless Australia. We'll be right back, folks. Don't go anywhere. InfoWarsStore.com, Diet Force. Get it now.